Can I mention the time when you found money stuffed in a sock? Like he hides cash.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal about getting the rent money. And it's kind of embarrassing that I want to feel all the feelings that you get to feel from me.
There is a specific kind of relationship dynamic that 90 Day Fiancé keeps returning to, season after season, and it never gets less uncomfortable to watch. It's the one where one person is so hungry for the relationship to work that they absorb every cost, emotional and financial, while the other person lets them. Darcey and Georgi gave us one of the show's most drawn-out versions of that dynamic, and by the time it fully unraveled on screen, a lot of viewers weren't shocked. They were just sad, maybe a little frustrated. Mostly frustrated, honestly. What I want to talk about today is the financial side of their relationship. Specifically, the stretch of episodes where the money stuff got impossible to ignore. The sock full of cash, the unpaid rent, the Bulgaria vacation house. The group chatted with Darcey's dad. All of it. Because taken individually, each of these moments could be explained away or rationalized. Taken together, they form a pretty clear picture of two people who had fundamentally incompatible ideas about what their relationship was actually for. My read, and I want to be upfront that this is my read based on what aired, is that Georgi was not some cartoon villain who showed up with a master plan to drain Darcey's bank account. I think the reality is messier and in some ways more troubling than that. I think he was a man who accepted a very comfortable arrangement, made his own financial priorities quietly and separately, and then acted surprised and defensive when Darcey noticed. That's not a heist. That's just a particular kind of selfishness that tends to thrive in relationships where one person is too afraid of conflict to address things early. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me walk through the actual documented storyline first, because the sequence of events matters here. Darcey Silva has been in this franchise long enough that she has become something close to a franchise institution. She came in on 90 Day Fiancé before the 90 days, first with Jesse Meester and then with Tom Brooks, and both of those relationships gave us some genuinely painful television. By the time she started her own spinoff, Darcey and Stacey, alongside her twin sister, the show had essentially committed to documenting her romantic life as an ongoing project. Georgi Rusev entered the picture during that spinoff. He's Bulgarian, significantly younger than Darcey, and the two of them moved fast, the way people on this franchise tend to do when the cameras are already rolling. What the show documented across multiple seasons of Darcey and Stacey was a relationship that leaned heavily on Darcey's financial resources. This wasn't hidden or subtle. Darcey talked openly about paying for things. Georgia lived in her orbit, in the lifestyle she maintained, and the show was pretty transparent about the fact that he wasn't contributing at the same level. Now, some people will say that's fine, that relationships can have unequal financial arrangements, and that doesn't make someone a bad partner. That's true. The question is whether both people are honest about what the arrangement is, and whether the person with fewer resources is contributing in other ways, or at least being genuine about their intentions. The sock moment is where things shifted for a lot of viewers. What aired on the show was a scene where Georgia was found to have a significant amount of cash stashed away. The exact framing I remember is that he had this wad of cash, and the implication was that he'd been quietly accumulating it while Darcey was covering their shared expenses. I want to be careful here because I'm working from what was shown on screen, and reality television edits things. The sock itself became a kind of symbol in the fan discourse, and honestly, it's not a bad symbol. It's the physical version of the financial disconnect that had been running through their whole relationship. What struck me about that scene, and what I think a lot of viewers responded to, was the gap between the image Georgi projected and what that cash represented. Here is someone who, by all appearances on the show, was not pulling his weight financially in the relationship, and yet he had the capacity to save, which means the decision not to contribute wasn't about inability. It was about priority. His priority was building something for himself, which, again, is not inherently villainous. People are allowed to save their money. But when you're in a relationship where your partner is covering your living expenses, the ethics of that get complicated fast. The rent situation is a good example of how those complications played out in real time. What the show documented was Georgi not paying his share of the rent on the first of the month, not responding to Darcey's messages about it, and Darcey eventually pulling her father into a group chat to essentially force the conversation. I've thought about that sequence a lot because it's so specific and so strange. Adding your dad to a group chat with your partner to get him to pay rent is not something most people would do unless every other avenue had already failed. It tells you something about the communication pattern they had established, which is to say, they didn't have one that worked. The gaslighting piece, and I'm using that word carefully because it gets thrown around a lot, came when Georgi pushed back on the financial criticism by pointing to Darcey's spending habits. She buys designer clothes. She spends money on her appearance and her lifestyle. This is true. Darcey does spend money on those things, and some viewers found that response somewhat valid. My read is that it was a deflection. The question wasn't whether Darcey was financially perfect. The question was whether Georgi was holding up his end of a shared financial agreement. Those are different conversations, and conflating them is a pretty classic way of avoiding accountability. What made Georgi's position particularly hard to defend was what came next, the Bulgaria house. He said on camera, or it was presented this way in the edit, that he was saving money to eventually buy a vacation property in Bulgaria for himself. Not for them, for himself. Future tense, singular. I think this is the moment that clarified the relationship dynamic for a lot of people who had been giving him the benefit of the doubt, because now you have a complete picture. He was accepting financial support from Darcey for their shared life, while quietly saving toward a personal asset that existed entirely outside of that shared life. He wasn't building toward their future, he was building toward his future. Darcey was just the means of getting there faster. Now, I want to steelman this a little because I think the most honest version of this analysis requires it. There's a version of Georgi's perspective where his behavior makes more sense, even if it doesn't become sympathetic. If you're a younger man from a different country, in a relationship that the cameras are recording, in a lifestyle that you didn't build and might not last, it is not irrational to think about your own financial security. Reality TV relationships have an unusually high failure rate. The show itself was basically documenting the relationship's dysfunction. Maybe he looked at the situation and thought, correctly, that this isn't going to work out, and he should protect himself. That's a coherent position. The problem is that he was doing this while accepting Darcey's financial support and, from all appearances, allowing her to believe they were building something together. You can protect yourself financially and still be honest with your partner. Those aren't mutually exclusive. The issue wasn't that he was saving money. The issue was the combination of accepting her support, keeping his savings secret, and planning for a solo future while presenting as a committed partner. All three things together create a picture that is hard to characterize as anything other than a bad faith arrangement. The engagement ring question is worth mentioning here because it connects to the same thread. Darcey wanted a ring. She talked about it. The show followed this. and there was the question of who was going to pay for it and what kind of ring it would be. I don't want to overstate what I know about the specifics of that situation because I'm not certain about all the details, but the broader point is that in the context of a man who had a sock full of cash and was saving for his own vacation property, the ring conversation becomes a different kind of conversation. It becomes a question about what he was actually willing to invest in her. And the answer, based on what the show documented, seems to be not much. The fight that eventually aired, where Darcey demanded her money back, was the kind of scene that 90 Day Fiancé builds toward, but rarely delivers with this much raw specificity. Most of the time, the show gives you drama that's emotional, relational, about feelings and communication. This one was transactional. She wanted her money back. She felt she'd been funding a man who was using her as a stepping stone, and she said so. Georgi's response, from what I remember of the edit, didn't really engage with the substance of what she was saying. He defended himself without addressing the core accusation. That's a pattern. The aftermath of all this was the two of them in the same bed, turned away from each other, barely speaking. It's a recurring image in this franchise. Two people who've built a relationship on a shaky foundation discovering that the foundation doesn't hold and not having the tools to deal with it. In Darcey and Georgi's case, I think the financial issues were a symptom of something that had been true from the beginning, which is that they wanted different things and were both invested, for different reasons, in not saying so out loud. Darcey wanted a partner, a committed relationship, validation that she was worth loving and worth staying for. She'd been in this franchise through multiple relationships that ended badly, and Georgi represented another chance. That need is understandable. It's human. The show hasn't always been kind to her about it, and I think some of the mockery she gets from the fan community for being desperate is genuinely unfair. Wanting love is not a character flaw. Being willing to overlook red flags in pursuit of it is a pattern worth examining, but it doesn't make her a fool. Georgi wanted, as far as I can tell from what aired, a comfortable life and eventually his own property in Bulgaria. Whether he wanted a genuine relationship with Darcey, I honestly don't know. The show didn't give us a lot of his interior life in a way that felt unperformed. He was guarded on camera in a way that made him hard to read, and I'm not going to pretend I can see through that edit to the real person underneath. What I think is fair to say is that the financial arrangement they had was never clearly defined, never mutually agreed upon in any explicit way, and never honestly examined until it was too late. That's a failure on both sides, though not an equal one. Darcey enabled the arrangement by funding it and not demanding clarity. Georgi took advantage of the arrangement by accepting it, saving separately, and planning for a future that didn't include her while living in a present she was paying for. The relative responsibility isn't equal, but both of them avoided the conversation that might have forced honesty earlier. There's also something worth saying about how the show itself participated in this dynamic. 90 Day Fiancé and its spin-offs have a financial interest in keeping these couples together long enough to generate content. The show benefits from ambiguity, from drawn-out conflict, from the question of whether things will work out. That structural incentive doesn't serve the people in the relationships particularly well. Darcey staying with Georgi longer than she should have is, among other things, good television. Her eventual meltdown over the money is also good television. The show is not neutral in this. I'm not saying the producers fabricated any of the financial dynamics. I don't think they did. But the environment of the show, the cameras, the pressure to perform a relationship, the audience that's invested in your story, that environment is not one that encourages the kind of blunt, private financial conversation that might have resolved things in episode 2. So some of what we watched was a relationship being slowly destroyed by a conflict that the show had every incentive not to resolve quickly. The sock full of cash will probably be Georgi's defining 90-day moment. It's a genuinely perfect encapsulation of something that's hard to articulate in abstract terms, but very easy to understand when you see it. Here is a man who is being financially supported by his partner. Here is his secret stash. Here is his real plan. You don't need a lot of commentary to understand what you're looking at. Where I land on all of this is roughly here. I don't think Georgi set out to con Darcey in the way that the most dramatic fan theories suggest. I think he found himself in a very comfortable situation, made rational, self-interested choices within it, and avoided the honest conversation that would have ended the comfort. That's not a heist. It's not a sock fund in the criminal sense. It's just a person who took what was offered and gave back less than he received, which is a thing people do in relationships, and which is still a betrayal of the person who is giving. Darcey has been on this show long enough that viewers sometimes forget she's a real person, having real experiences, and not just a character. The memes are easy. The Darcey needs glasses jokes are easy. What's harder is acknowledging that watching someone keep reaching for love in a franchise that keeps handing her situations like this one is genuinely difficult to witness. She didn't need our sympathy necessarily, but she deserved a partner who was honest with her. She didn't get one. Whether Darcey has fully reckoned with the financial patterns in her relationships, I don't know. She's still publicly active, still part of the franchise world, still moving through her life. What happened with Georgi is one chapter of a longer story, and I'd be making stuff up if I claimed to know how that story ends. What I do know is that the dynamic we watched, the one where love is paid for and never quite reciprocated at the same depth, is not unique to Darcey. It shows up everywhere in this franchise. It shows up everywhere in life. What made the Georgi situation notable wasn't the betrayal itself, but how specifically documented it was. The sock, the rent, the Bulgaria house, the group chat with her dad. Most people who've been in a version of this relationship don't have it filmed and edited into a multi-season arc. The rest of us just have the memory of it and the slow realization of what we were actually looking at. That's the part that lingers for me about Darcey and Georgi, not the drama of it, not the conflict scenes, but the clarity that came too late. There's something genuinely uncomfortable about watching someone understand on camera that the story they've been telling themselves about their relationship isn't the story that's actually been happening. Darcey got that clarity. It cost her. And the audience got to watch the whole thing. I'm not sure that's a good trade, but it's the one the franchise runs on. And as long as people keep watching, including me, it's the one that continues.